Welcome to this Sunday morning broadcast of Marvin Methodist Church's Sanctuary Service. My name is Doug Baker, and on behalf of the church family, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Today, we continue our sermon series entitled Christmas Harvest. This series is based on the parable of the soils from Matthew 13. Is your heart receptive to God's Word? Are you understanding it and applying it to assure transformation in the Christmas harvest that God desires for you? Let's join in as the sermon is underway.
The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. This is the word of God for you and me, the people of God. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. I was so excited when we moved to Tyler. It's been 18 months now. It's wild. And I was excited when we moved here for one specific reason, a lot of reasons, but one in specific. And do you know what it was? It was because I had a yard that I was excited about. Now, I think Lauren was probably excited for some other reasons, but this was mine. And see, I was growing up, I had a little lawn care business that I came to love helping people's yards. And I took a lot of pride after a couple of my yards won Copperfield Yard of the Month. I lived in a subdivision named Copperfield, and once that became the case, I became a hot ticket in the neighborhood, right? And so people wanted me to come and help with them, and I loved doing that. And someday, I remember thinking, someday I'll have a yard of my own. And well, when we got our first home in Houston, we quickly learned that the yard that we were given was not much to look at. It had no sprinkler system, it was full of weeds, and no matter how much effort I put into this yard, it was just never going to recover. I was good at cutting grass, not figuring out how to grow it. And so when we move here, I get this brand new yard, this one that had just been planted with this sprinkler system, and I thought, here we are, I've made it. Quickly, I learned that because the soil was not very good and it was shallow when they planted this grass, it didn't take long for a fungus to develop and basically kill my entire yard. Yeah, I know, sad. And since April, I've only mowed the yard like 4 times. And some of you are like, why are you complaining? But this gives me great joy. And so it just wouldn't grow. And I would tell my neighbors and complain about it. And they would say, it looks okay, it looks fine, like just let it go. But that's the thing. Because of the shallow soil and because what was happening underneath, it had the appearance of life, but there actually wasn't any life in my yard. We're going to have to figure out how to fix that down the road. But the reason why I share that to begin is because it's a way for us to think about this part of the parable of the sower that we turn to today. This idea of shallow soil in a place where there is the appearance of life, but when things get difficult, maybe there's not actually life there. This is the parable that we are looking at during our time with Advent. And you may wonder, I thought too, as we prepared for this, that the parable of the sower is a strange way for us to look at the coming of Christ in the Advent season. But I think as the weeks go on, you'll see why this parable is a great lens for us to understand what it means that the kingdom is coming and that it is already here. But for that, we have to understand what a parable is in the first place and why Jesus uses this interesting way to teach about the coming kingdom. I love this definition of a parable from Wesley Allen. He's the dean of chapel at SMU. He says a parable is a metaphor. It's drawn from nature or common life. And so in this case, in an agriculture world, he is talking about farming. And it arrests the hearer by its vividness or strangeness and leaves the mind in sufficient doubt about its precise interpretation and application. And so if you read through Matthew 13, where these series of parables happen, the disciples, they sit there and nod their heads, but later when they get Jesus alone, they say, but what does it all mean, right? And that's what's happening for us as we look to these parables. It is intended, the parables are, to tease into active thought the mind, even to the point of altering one's worldview. And so Matthew talks about this parable because he wants to challenge what we believe about God's kingdom and the kingdom being here. This parable is in a unique place in the Gospel of Matthew. It's in the height of Jesus' teaching and public ministry, which includes miracles like healing the sick, casting out the demonic, telling a storm to stop being a storm, leading those that are watching to say, "Who is this man?" Telling a man born paralyzed to get up and walk. See, in Matthew's gospel to this point, Jesus has been showing them what the kingdom of heaven looks like and consists of, and now he'll begin to tell them what it is all about through these parables. This parable is the first of many that he tells standing from a boat, speaking to multitudes. And it is positioned at the beginning of the series of parables because it describes specifically people that are able to grasp what the kingdom of heaven is and those that cannot. So in the middle of Matthew 13, there is this prophecy of Isaiah that talks about ears that cannot hear, and eyes that cannot see, and hardened hearts that cannot receive. I always find it fascinating that people just don't get Jesus when they see all of these things happening. And early on, the burning question in Matthew, as you get to the 13th chapter, is how could people question his credibility when he's telling storms to stop storming and he's telling paralyzed people to get up? It's always been fascinating to me when we see, for example, Jesus in the synagogue. He goes to a man that has a crippled hand and he heals this man, and the Pharisees are like, "That's nice and all, dude, but it's the Sabbath," right? Like, get over it, guys. But how is it that at this point people miss it? How could they miss this? And it's interesting for me because if Jesus were doing this in front of us, I'd like to think that I might get it, right? That I might understand. But that's why Jesus gives us this parable, because he tells of the things that get in the way. And I would argue that there's probably many things that can get in our way and are getting in the way of understanding that the kingdom has already come and it's here. So what's the message? What's the word that some miss? What is Jesus getting at about the kingdom in this section of parables? Well, the message is about the kingdom of God breaking in. In the Gospels, the word kingdom is used over 100 times, probably even more, upwards of 150. And constantly, Jesus is teaching on this. And this is the gospel truth that Jesus is king and that he's establishing his kingdom. This is what we turn to in Advent. This is what our focus, not just some birthday party for Jesus, for some baby, but the coming of the one who created heaven and earth. That's where we turn our hearts to. St. Augustine describes the scandal of God coming in Jesus this way. Man's maker was made man, that he, ruler of the stars, might nurse at his mother's breast, that the bread might hunger, that the fountain would thirst, that the light would sleep, that the way would be tired on its journey, that the truth might be accused of false witness, that the teacher be beaten with whips, that the foundation would be suspended on wood, that strength might grow weak, that the healer might be wounded, that life might die. One Christmas Eve, I preached about Holy Week on Christmas Eve. People were a little confused. What I was trying to do was to show that the incarnation was more than just a baby born in some manger or strange place, but it was more about who the baby was and what it meant for our world. And it was the right idea in theory, but requires a skillful preacher to pull it off. Afterwards, someone came up to me and said, "Preacher, we came for the Christmas story. We can get that Easter stuff next time we come to church." I think he was kidding, but I'm not sure. Friends, the incarnation is the scandalous coming to us of the maker of heaven and earth. It is the cosmic bridge that brings us back to God. It is also the declaration of his impending victory over the world of evil, sin, and death. His kingdom is not of this world. His kingdom has different principles than the world. It is about love and justice and mercy. His kingdom has different authority, not our partisan politics or our man-made career successes or the love that we pursue over and beyond him. His kingdom has eternal consequence and right now is a reality. And the truth is, from Matthew 13, some will miss it. Some will miss this kingdom. And Jesus knew it to be true. He says it in this parable. I want you to see something from Matthew 13. Matthew says that only the first soil is one that doesn't receive the word. But even that first soil hears it. But the final 3 out of the 4 soils, they not only hear the word, but they receive it. And our shallow soil for today receives it even with joy. There are Christians, these are Christians in at least the way that we have often thought about what it means to be a Christian. They hear the word, they receive it with joy, they respond. But it's interesting that only one of those 3, only one of the 4 actually produces a harvest. That there's actual fruit that come from this soil. And for me, there's 2 realities here. One, there are people that believe in the kingdom but are not citizens of the kingdom. And 2, salvation is much more than a momentary experience or a momentary decision. See, outside the church or with old friends, I often hear, well, I don't go to church or I can't believe in God because look at the bad things that happen that are done in Jesus' name, or the church has hurt me in this way or that way. And no doubt, and often I find myself mourning for the experiences that they've seen or the times that the church has gotten it so wrong, the times that Bible believers actually enslaved people or Christians being idle or even enabling in Nazi Germany, see Dietrich Bonhoeffer, or Christians today putting their political stance before the throne of Jesus. It happens over and over again, and Jesus knew it. One commentator, Frederick Bruner, says this: Jesus knew this problem personally. He experienced it himself with God's own people. Jesus teaches disciples that not all who receive the word hold it. As the English proverb has it, not all who go to church say their prayers. Only one of the 4 who hears the word stands under it, yields to its authority, obeys it. Armed with this 3 out of 4 truth, the scandal of unchristian Christians can be overcome. For we now know that this scandal is not proof against Jesus. He predicted it. Friends, what I deeply want us to do in this Advent is to do an inventory of our hearts and to see if we are standing under what it means to be Christian. If we are experiencing the deep, abiding love in our lives so that we might know the hope, joy, peace, and love of God. John Wesley described this unchristian Christian idea in a sermon he wrote called Almost Christian. He said that there are those that go up just to the margins but don't experience the fullness of the gospel. He would say that they have these 3 characteristics. First, they have a heathen honesty. Wesley loved the word heathen. I don't recommend it today, right? I don't think it will fly well with your neighbor. But he said that the almost Christian had a heathen honesty, meaning they knew that they were lost, that they knew that they were broken. There was at least an honesty there. Secondly, they had the outward religion without the inward power, that they knew what it means to do their devotionals and their Jesus calling in the morning or to be here at church. And thirdly, they had sincerity. They had a real desire to love God and to do his will. But what he would say is they don't have the deep, abiding love of God in their heart as an altogether Christian who is marked by these 3 things: a deep love of God, God, a deep love for neighbor, and a faith that no matter what happens in this world, no matter life circumstances, we are secure eternally in our Jesus who is King. But that's the difference here between the two. And at the end of this sermon, Wesley would say, may we all thus experience what it is to not almost only, but altogether Christians, being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Jesus, knowing we have peace with God through Jesus Christ, rejoicing in hope of the glory of God, and having the love of God shed abroad in our hearts by the Holy Ghost given unto us. What would it look like for us to be all together with Jesus? All together given to him, all together experiencing his love in us for others. And the second thing we see here is that salvation is more than a moment of enthusiasm. It's not just an event, it's a journey. Growing up, I gave myself to Jesus about 10 times. Like every summer at church camp, just trying to see if something would stick, right? Like, will you baptize me again? Something ain't working, right? Like that was me, just over and over again. And I joke, but I think that we've reduced faith in Jesus and in the kingdom to a momentary decision, to a mental assent of some sort, like some truth that we can tip our caps to and then move on with our life. And even for some of us that have had a miraculous conversion, and maybe especially those that have had a miraculous conversion, there is a danger to think that this event is everything within itself. One early church father writing about the parable of the soil says this: we cannot leave the second soil without saying the obvious. A joyous conversion is no guarantee of a Christian life. It is not how we start our history with the word, it is how we continue it. Big conversions then stand under a limited criticism here. Not that they are evil, but that they are perilous if we put our trust in them rather than in God. The word brings a person to the goal only when that person bravely resists the outside pressures and overcomes one's selfish interior desires. It's not how we start our history with the word, but it's how we continue in it. Kingdom reception is confirmed in discipleship, about how we walk with Jesus. And this is why the farming analogy is so brilliant, because it requires work in the dirt. See, the path of last week, the first soil, didn't even have a chance to receive the seed because there was no plowing. There had been nothing done there. Y'all, God's love has given us the ability to work and to walk with him. God's love has given us life, and too often we don't walk in it. We don't experience it. And then trouble or persecution comes along. Now, in this parable, the short-lived joy is ended with trouble and persecution. And no doubt the early church would hear this and be challenged by it as they were facing horrible and terrible persecution in the first couple of centuries. This semester, I read the martyrdom of Polycarp, which is the earliest recorded martyrdom outside of the New Testament. Christians like Polycarp, faced with death as a sport, were fed to lions, or like Polycarp, were burned alive if they wouldn't renounce their faith, if they wouldn't say that Jesus is not in fact king. And when Polycarp was challenged, he said, "God has never let me down. Why would I do it in this moment?" But that is not the only hardship or persecution that I think this parable can talk about. I think we could also see the trouble that comes up when Peter is standing and watching Jesus beaten and near crucifixion, and someone says, "Hey, aren't you with that guy?" And Peter says, No, I'm not," and runs away. It's about the stakes being raised. And see, I think the point of this soil, even a joyful conversion will not carry you when the stakes are high, when your career is on the line, when your marriage is hitting the rocks, when you're faced with death, when you're faced with a diagnosis, when you're faced with a pandemic that changes everything. No, it's about walking with Jesus in these moments so that it's not just an enthusiastic belief, but it's a deep abiding and obedience with the one who is with you in the midst of it all. See, friends, there are many that are very glad to hear a good sermon and yet do not profit by it. Or there are many that are pleased to be touched in their devotion or in their prayer, but they're not changed or ruled by it. And too often I find myself right there in that place. Right there with the form of religion and not the power of walking with Jesus. And so what do we do? Well, let me give you a reminder here. The seed in Matthew 13 is not an expendable resource in the parable. The truth is, the kingdom comes whether we are ready or not. And it is sowed widely. And it's not worried about where it falls. It goes and it comes. But it is critical for us to know the state of our own soil. Understanding in Matthew's gospel, the word understanding is a theme that's used over and over again. The same parable is in Luke and in Mark, but in Matthew, it talks about specifically what it means to understand. And understanding in Matthew's gospel is not just an intellectual assent. It is not about just understanding something in the way that we think about, but it is about standing under the meaning with our life. It's about making the message one's own, standing under his teaching in obedience and walking in it. And we must see to our soil. And I think we should before trouble comes, and it will come. We too often, I believe, turn to God in crisis. And though God is gracious in crisis, I wonder what the harvest would look like if we turn to him before the crisis comes. We see to our soil by working in the dirt. And I believe today the plowing is actually about repentance. You know, church, a lot of people think repentance is what is required before God takes you back. But as C.S. Lewis points, it is actually simply the description of the person who turns back to God. Repentance isn't this mean duty, it's a gift that he gives us, knowing that he's ready to receive us. Repentance is about unlearning self-conceit, self-will. It's about unlearning the loves that we have put before God. It's about turning back to him. And so I want to close our time together in a way that's a little bit different. I'd like to walk us through a few moments of silent prayer and reflection. And so if you are able, why don't you assume the posture of prayer, whether it's eyes closed or heads bowed. I want to invite us to consider a few things today. The first thing I want you to think about is, what do you need to turn away from today? What needs to be laid down at the altar? Is it something that you've been choosing over God? Is it self-will? Is it self-conceit? And secondly, what do you need from God today? Is it a reminder that he's good? That he's gracious? That you're loved? That you're not alone? And lastly, what does understanding the kingdom or standing under the kingdom look like for you today? What do you need to walk in this week? What do you need to take up? What's the calling that God has called you to? Gracious and loving God, we give you all the praise and glory today, and we give you thanks for your faithfulness when we are faithless, for your consistency in the midst of our wandering. And God, I just pray in this moment that you would help us to give you our divided hearts so that they might be undivided for you. God, I pray that you would bring healing and restoration into the room, that you would speak a word of love and grace and mercy for those that desperately need it. And God, for us all, would you increase our desire for you and your kingdom? In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, let all God's people say, amen.
Thank you for watching our broadcast this morning. I want to personally invite you to join us for Sunday morning services here at our campus at 300 West Irwin Street, downtown Tyler, especially during the month of December. You are welcome to visit our website to learn more about our church and its ministry, and if we can be of any assistance to your spiritual growth, I hope that you'll contact us. If you'd like to contribute to support the ministry of Marvin, please contact Robin Thomason through the information provided on the screen. May you experience God's best this Christmas and always.